If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who have been lost in the wilderness, what's your story? Me and my friends love outdoorsy stuff. One day we decided to drive a few hours to do some spelunking, caving. This particular cave is near a river, so it has a maze of streams inside of it and a waterfall. Being young and stupid, we didn't have much of a plan and took off. Well, turns out, it started raining while we were inside. The rain partially flooded the cave and sealed off a lot of passageways. It was unreal, you could actually see the water levels swelling up. Needless to say, we shat bricks and did some incredibly stupid stuff like swimming some of the flooded narrow ways. We came out starving, dehydrated, cold, and bleeding. Turns out, we had spent around 13 or so hours in the cave. I was at a friend's cabin and went squirrel hunting alone at dawn with his dog. I had been at the cabin for a few days and thought I had acquired a good knowledge of the local area. After about an hour of trekking through moderately heavy maple forest, I realized I was lost. There was no cell phone coverage, I had no compass, and the sky was overcast. It is a terrifying feeling not knowing where you are, or even which way is north. I wandered around aimlessly for another hour looking for a familiar landmark, but I was getting nowhere. Out of desperation, I turned to the dog and in an upbeat voice said, "Let's go home, it's time to eat." The dog quickly turned around and started bounding over a ridge. 15 minutes later we were back at the cabin. I still remember how I hooted once I knew I was safe. Now I never go into the woods without a compass and whistle, and I always let someone know where I'm going and when I expect to return. And yes, the dog ate very well that day. Okay, so. When I was like 8 years old, my mom and I moved in with a friend of hers who had a son several years older than me. Let's call him Travis. Travis was a fucking psychopath. I was really into stage magic at the time and had just received a little magician outfit with the hat and cape and everything, so keep my outfit in mind. One day Travis was watching wrestling on TV and got super amped, so we went out to the trampoline where he proceeded to beat the shit out of me while screaming about the culinary endeavors of The Rock and farting on my face. Anyway, he accidentally sat on my face and broke my nose. I was crying, there was blood, and he knew he was about to get in trouble, so he decided to lead me off into the woods under the pretext of taking me to a nearby relative to find band-aids. He ditched me in the woods. In a magician costume. I wandered around crying for a while before remembering some bullshit from school about leaving behind markers if you ever get lost so that you know you're walking in circles or whatever. So I started removing my outfit and leaving parts of it hanging from trees. At some point I stumbled upon a neighbor who was oddly nonchalant about the half-dressed little boy coming out of the woods in tightly whities and a magician hat. With blood all over his face. This story doesn't involve me getting lost, but I was separated from my friend in the middle of nowhere and he was almost delirious from the heat and dehydration when I found him. I grew up in a small mining town in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. When I was a kid, the town was still pretty small, and only had about 3,000 people in it. The town is basically surrounded by dry arid bushland and desert further out. There is a dam and other places with water nearby, but massive expanses of nothing much in between them. One day, some of my schoolmates were bragging about riding their push bikes all the way to a roadhouse on the Great Northern Highway, roughly halfway between our town and the next. The roadhouse was a good 2 to 2.5 hour drive with a mostly 110 km/h speed limit, but there were shitloads of hills on the way, and the summer sun in the Pilbara is blazing hot. Riding your push bike there as a 13 to 14-year-old kid would have been just about impossible without some serious preparation. Rest stops, water, sunblock, some kind of transportable shade, etc. They claimed they did it with nothing but their school uniforms and some water from a puddle on the way. I knew they had to be lying, and decided to put the ringleader in his place. He was the only other guy my size in the school, was way better at sports, and never let me forget it. I challenged him in front of probably about 20 other kids who were mostly members of his unofficial fan club to do the ride again with me. I would take supplies and shit in case he wanted to give up, and he could replicate his feat of living off the land like a true pioneering trailblazer. To my surprise, instead of the expected response of turning me down with some cop-out about how I was stupid for suggesting it, he agreed. To my even greater surprise, that Saturday morning, he turned up at the meeting point just on the edge of town with nothing but a shirt, shorts, shoes and his bike. There was a water bottle in the holder on his bike frame, but it was only quarter full. We idiotically kicked things off at a fast pace, like we were going to get there and back by lunchtime, and when we started to get tired half an hour later I started to lag behind him. Eventually we got to a twisty bit of road where the highway cut through some large rocky hills, and I lost sight of him going around a bend. I was absolutely buggered at that point, so I stopped and rested for about 10 minutes. When I kept going, there was no sight of him at all, even on the next big straight that came up. I don't know exactly how long I kept going, but I started to panic that he would actually collapse from dehydration just 2 minutes down the road, so I kept going. Eventually, I was so exhausted that I couldn't pedal the bike uphill and had to walk it, and the road was so hot that my feet were hot through my shoes. I gave up, and it was probably the most horrible I'd ever felt before. I was sure that I had gotten him killed. As I was coasting back down the road about 30 minutes later, I saw a small goat track running down the side of a hill that lead into a small crop of trees, and decided to rest in the shade. When I got most of the way down the track, I saw his bike laying in the dirt and immediately started calling his name. When I found him, he was sitting down on a tree root, throat too parched to make any sound. I gave him a bottle of water, which he drank too fast, and then spent a good 2 minutes coughing and spluttering. We were both absolutely rooted. Eventually we walked our bikes back up to the road and were lucky enough to get rescued by a dude in a utility vehicle, Australian version of a pickup truck. When we got back, we went round to my parents' house and played the Sega inside for about 3 hours, and then he went home. I fell asleep at like 4 p.m. and still didn't get up until my mom came in to find out what was wrong with me at 9 a.m. Sunday. I never told them what actually happened. I just said we'd been building jumps at the bike track in the bush, just over the road all day. At lunch break on Monday, my new friend left his other mates to come find me, and invited me over to play Foursquare with them. They thought he was planning to make a fool of me, and started making little jabs about how I was totally wrong about them riding to the roadhouse, and I just nodded and said yeah, he showed me. And that was that. We were never close friends, but he always respected me after that and didn't encourage the other guys when they gave me a hard time anymore. We both ended up being part of this silly initiative that the school had come up with called the school council years later. He was the recreational guy, I can't remember the titles, and I was the environment guy. He and I also went to the city together as the sports and debate captains respectively for a couple school trips. This actually happened to me about a month ago. I'm a hunter. It's a great way for me to escape the everyday hustle and bustle and just sit alone in the woods, watching it either wake up or go to sleep. This particular day I was deer hunting about 20 feet up a tree, and anyone who hunts knows that you go all the way until dark, pack up your stuff, and then come out. Sunset was around 5 p.m. and I sat in the tree until about 5:40 p.m., and then climbed down from the tree, packed up my stuff and realized that I didn't have a flashlight. No big deal, I've got my cell phone. Oops. 5% battery left because I'm so far out in the woods, long hike in, that it was searching for signal the whole time and drained itself. I shut off my phone to conserve battery. I figure, oh well, I'll be fine. I'll start walking back now. Even though I spent a lot of time outdoors, and practically spent every weekend as a kid in the woods, even I can get lost. There's a moment that I just can't describe where you realize that you're lost, and you have no flashlight, and have no idea which way to go. It's a pretty unsettling feeling, but you want to remain calm. You're panicking on the inside, but you know that will do no good to panic, so you try to calm yourself down. I did this for a while before I decided to just sit down. By this time I had been lost in the woods, in the dark, with no flashlight for about 3 hours. It was an overcast night and a new moon, so I had zero light to work with. I decided to sit down and take inventory of what I had, and remain calm. I took out my cell phone and sent my fiancée a text that said, "Phone dying. Lost in woods, may spend the night here. I won't die, promise, love you." And turned off my phone in case I needed that 3% to make an emergency call. It was now around 9 p.m. I realized that I wasn't going to die out there in the woods, but I wasn't going to have a fun night either. I did have a gun, plenty of ammo, good clothing and bottle of water. Oh, and a full pack of cigarettes. I could start a fire and be fine. Wait. I could start a fire. I could build a torch. Why didn't I think of this before? I had some paracord that I had in my hunting pack that I typically use to pull my gun up a tree with after I've climbed it, so I cut off a section of it and bundled up a few leaves/sticks/bark and made a torch. It was wet, so I used some lip balm on the string to get it going a little better, and the torch worked. Not perfectly, but now I could see. I ended up eventually finding a trail that I knew, even in the dimly lit torch darkness, and hiked out from there to my vehicle. If it weren't for that cigarette lighter, I'd probably have spent the night there. I got to my truck, called my fiancée who was freaking out, and headed home for a beer. Anaheim Lake, British Columbia, 1967. I had only arrived that day. My friends, Mike and his wife, had gone to town for groceries and left me at the cabin with the dog. I decided to go for a walk. Tybalt and I took off across the road and into the woods. After strolling around for a while, I crossed back over the road and continued on. I climbed up some ridges and wandered down in the little hollows, not paying much attention to where I was. I had never been in big woods before nor so far north. I began to tire and to think about food, so I decided to head back to the cabin. I then realized, in one heart-stopping moment, that I had no idea where I was. I could feel the panic building way down inside me, ready to reduce me to a pissing, screaming imbecile. I scrambled up a ridge, and then a tree at the top of it, to look out. I saw an ocean of jack pines, dark forbidding trees, in all directions. Nothing relieved the monotony of those trees. Nothing. No one knew where I was. I remembered a map I had, back in the truck of course, which showed that the cabin was 7 miles from the nearest house to the east, 90 miles to the west, 400 miles to the north, and the same to the south. I was fighting off panic with every breath and on the edge of losing the battle. I was lost, and I knew, in my churning guts, I knew I could die right here. Tybalt seemed unconcerned. Stupid dog. I sat still, again on the ground, afraid. I had no thoughts. I was paralyzed, unable to move. Somehow, I found, somewhere inside me, underneath the roaring terror, a place that was dead calm. I had no idea it was there, but I found it. I looked out from that place within and saw, clearly, everything around me. After a long moment, I felt a tug, right in my middle, strong and clear. Without a thought, I got up and followed that steady pull. I walked straight to the cabin as if I were on a well-marked path. I didn't tell this story for years. I still don't understand it. 2 years ago, I was on an Arctic survival training in Nunavut, Canada. In February. No trees can grow there. Nothing but rocks and snow. Shit's cold. Anyways, our group of about 150 people would move on snowmobiles to set up camp every night. We were guided by a group of Inuit rangers. Real badasses. We moved in convoys, one behind another, always following the same tracks, in case we got lost. Rule of thumb is if you can't see the guy behind you, you stop, until the entire convoy stops and regroups. Well, one day, while on a run back from the new camp to pick up people and supplies, we hit a blizzard. We are on sea ice, anywhere you look is flat, white, cold nothingness as far as the eye can see. Which isn't very far with the wind and snow. Maybe 20 meters. We were trying to get back as fast as possible. Too fast, apparently. I look back and can't see anyone behind me, so I stop, and look in front of me to see a blur silhouette and dim tailgate light disappear in this white hell. I look back again. I'm alone. Of course I don't panic, this system worked all the time, so I wait. But after a couple minutes, I get anxious. What if the guy behind me passed me in the blizzard and found the convoy? Our faces are completely covered and we wear the same gear, there's no way of identifying each other. They would know I was missing until they reached camp. Or what if the convoy turned back and found them, but not me? Or what if everyone behind me is just waiting on the next one as planned? So I sit on my ride and wait. Until I think there's no way they haven't catched up yet. I'm going to find the convoy and see what's up. So I start moving and look down at the snow. No tracks. Fuck. The wind swept them away. How? It's been like 10 minutes, tops. I'm screwed. I start moving in the direction I think is right, when suddenly I see someone coming. It's a goddamn ranger. A northern badass wearing a fucking hoodie, with his rifle on his back and a cigarette in his leathery lips. In a blizzard. He leads me to the convoy. The entire convoy. Turns out the group behind me did pass right by me and we didn't notice. We keep going like nothing happened. And that was the most terrifying experience of my life. I was in New Orleans shortly after Katrina to do volunteer work. It was weird because all the road/street signs were gone after all the flooding etc. Also at that time, I didn't have GPS, and when I left to do some quick survey of the area at night, I decided not to bring a map of the city. As you imagine, I got lost pretty fast, and when I realized I was circling around the similar looking area, I started to panic. Remind you, it was shortly after Katrina, so no street signs, barely functioning street lamps, so felt like stuck in a haunted town. However, luckily at the time, I had a compass, the one you stick it on the dashboard, with me, and I knew at the time I left the FEMA camp, I knew of the general direction I was heading to. Also, I knew the camp was located near this big bright bridge which I caught a glimpse of as I was frantically driving around. So with those two, I finally made myself back to camp, and what a relief it was. I was deer hunting. I was walking along a trail that was alongside a stream. I thought the stream ran to the north. It didn't. It ran northeast. The trail itself was all muddy and slippery. After a good hour of walking along the trail, I decided to head back to the car. However, instead of walking back along the slippery, muddy trail, I decided to cut across the forest to get to the road the car was parked on. Since I believed that the stream ran north and the road was perpendicular to the west of the stream, I turned 90 degrees and began to cut across the forest to get back to the road. Here's the problem with being in an unfamiliar forest. Once you lose the defining landscape marker, in this case the stream, everything looks the same, everything. You can walk for what seems like miles and it never stops looking the same. After a while, I realized that I should have reached the road and had not. That's when I freaked out and started to panic. There were other hunters in the area because I saw some before departing down the stream trail. I shot my rifle in the air and screamed for help. After a couple of minutes I calmed down a bit. Remembered that I had a compass on me and decided to use it. I chose to walk due north, figuring that I would eventually hit the main road. Later, when I checked the map, I discovered this was probably the worst direction I could have picked since it was the farthest to any landmark. If I had gone east, I would have hit the stream again. If I had gone south, I would have eventually hit the stream. If I had gone west, I would have hit the road my car was parked on. So I trudged through shin-high swamp for what seemed like hours, but probably was only maybe an hour. I eventually came across a hiking trail. I followed the trail figuring that it would get me to a road or something much faster than continuing to walk in a specific direction. I came out about 10 minutes later to the road my car was parked on, but about a quarter of a mile away from the car. I got to the car totally exhausted and took off my boots because my feet were totally soaked. I then drove back to where I was staying and have never gone hunting again. I went on a houseboat trip to Lake Cumberland 4 years ago and got hopelessly lost. We had made friends with a couple of dock workers who said they'd jet ski out to our boat to party with us after they got off. They stick to their word and meet up with us after we had been drinking pretty much all day. I asked one of the guys if I can use his jet ski to ride around and he agrees. A friend and I hop on and set off with no real recollection of where our houseboat is, so just to recap, booze plus huge unfamiliar lake plus late afternoon. We ride around for an hour or so and turn to head back when it dawns on us, we have no idea where our houseboat is. We knew it was back in a cove, but intoxication combined with a setting sun and they all looked the exact same. We drove around for another hour and at this point the sun had pretty much set and you certainly don't want to be on a damn jet ski on a lake in the dark. We eventually found our boat and basically had to restrain the guy from killing us, as now he would have to ride back in the dark. I've never shit myself so hard. This happened on a sunny June day about 10 years ago. My friend and I got lost in a really big state park. I believe it was several tens of thousands of square miles in forested area. We had a map that the state park gave out, one of those old trail maps with dots and dashes where the different trails were. Neither of us were by any means expert navigators or woodsmen. We had sandwiches packed up in some waters because we planned a nice 5-mile hike up some hills and we planned on walking the tops of the hills around a valley in a big loop. There were some beautiful cliffs and interesting lookout spots along the way which made for some good photo opportunities. We had also packed a couple of special cigars, if you get my meaning. After traveling a couple miles up a low-maintenance dirt path, we arrived around noon and began our ascent up the hill. Once we reached the top, we took some pictures and had a nice smoke. We then proceeded to follow the little footpath around the tops of the hills. We got a couple miles in and the trails became very thin, like overgrown from disuse. We lost the trail a couple times and did big loops to try to pick up the path again. We still felt confident in our ability to make it out in time, so we enjoyed another smoke at dinner time. After dinner, we had to cross the valley to get to the other side of it, where we had planned on coming out. This is where we got lost. We lost the path, did a big loop, found the path, and lost it again. The path just kind of petered out and we could not find where it picked back up again. We checked the map, and thought we knew where we were, and decided to just pick a direction and hike toward where we figured the path would be. Well, after about 2 hours of tramping get up and down this hilly forest, we admitted we could not find the path. Not only that, but we had no clue what direction we came from. We were lost. And stoned. She started to panic, and I figured it would be a great time to mess with her, so while we were walking I said, "I have some bad news for you. I'm a serial killer," and wrapped my hands around her neck from behind. She thought for a minute that she was really going to die. We still joke about it. Anyhow, it was starting to get dark at this point, and we were miles from our origin. Luckily, we found the one stream that runs through the park in the area we were hiking. It passed under the road where we started, so we decided to follow it back. There were places where we could not walk along the bank, so we had to walk upstream in the water. In the dark. With only a couple Bic lighters and some sparse moonlight to show the way. It was very slow going. And of course, in the dark in the forest all of the primal fears come out. We thought every leaf rustling was a mountain lion pouncing or a bear sharpening its claws. We ended up making it back to the road and at about 1:30 a.m. and just about cried with relief. Good times. Some friends and I about 7 years ago were out on their deer hunting land in the middle of nowhere, Texas. Drinking, partying, loud music, bonfire, the works. So my friend and I decide to go off on his ATV to go see this old cemetery. We get off the ATV, walk to the cemetery, and being the drunk dum-dums we were turned off the ATV in pitch black. We couldn't find our way back and ended up going in the opposite direction. We walked for hours screaming for our friends who couldn't hear us over the music. Finally I told him we were getting ourselves more lost and we just needed to stay put till morning. After a very long, cold, terrifying night sleeping in the woods, our friends finally realized we never came back and went looking for us. They found the ATV but we were nowhere to be seen. I guess they found us 4 miles away. After driving around screaming for us, we heard them and screamed back. Biggest relief of my entire life was seeing them walk through the thick trees. We had so many bug bites and we were very shaken up, but we were very lucky that it wasn't worse. Lesson learned the hard way that day. Did not get lost in the wilderness, but it was definitely very deserted of a different kind. Visited my cousin in CA who was living with her friend at the time, so an unknown neighborhood to me. Back then I used to run very early in the morning just when the first lights started appearing, like at 3 to 4 a.m., so I decided to go out there as well. I'm usually good at orienting myself and remembering paths, so I ran a bit then turned back. Yet I could not find the house. I saw all the familiar places I had run past before, but not the house I was looking for. It was a strange feeling really, 5 a.m. in the middle of some suburbs in a big city full with houses, but I was so alone and lost. I circled and circled for almost 2 hours until I found the spot where I had made a wrong turn. I didn't have a phone on me and I'm not the type of person to be knocking on doors that early. Even then, what would I ask for help with? I didn't know any numbers to call, didn't know the address and didn't yet know names of the people at whose house I was staying at, just arrived, hadn't met them. It was a really stupid way and place to get lost, but I figured if I don't wander too far away from the places I was sure I had seen on the way from there, I'll eventually find it. Still, pretty scary. I've been lost in the woods twice, but both times I knew that if I walked for a short time in any direction, I would come to some form of roadway. The first time my GF and I went hiking through the woods near her house in the winter. After having sex in the woods, VRRR. But worth it, we got turned around and overran our footprints too many times, so we didn't know which way out. We finally just decided to beeline in one direction because we knew we'd eventually come to a road. It was rough beelining through the snow, and it got dark quick. So, at one point we stopped, soaked, and I was wondering how much longer we could trudge through the snow. I began considering making shelter. We started up again and immediately came to a snowmobile trail in the woods, which led right to a road. It was a scary last couple of minutes before we stumbled into the trail. You literally couldn't see it from 10 feet away, when I was pondering if we should stop. The second time, I was geocaching with some friends and we made it to the cache as the sun was beginning to set. We check out the cache and start back to the car, beelining through the woods again, because it's easy in the summer with a GPS, and the batteries in the GPS die. Now, we stopped to decide whether to go back to the cache because there were batteries in the cache, or continue back to the car. We decided to continue back to the car, because we felt like we knew the way. Again, it got a little dicey as it got dark, but then someone who lived on the road we were heading towards let their dog out, off in the distance, and the dog was barking incessantly. So, we just had to follow the sound of the dog, and it led us right to the road where we were parked. Thanks, dog. Myself and a group of friends since went hiking down the coast of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state, and we camped out there for 3 nights. The day we were scheduled to leave, 2 of the 4 of us left prior to the other 2 of us. I know, never split the party, but they left regardless of our objection. With the map. The way the coastal trail works, is there are beaches and headlands with very steep cliffs. Now normally, you have to climb up and over these headlands. They are tall, and it's very hard with a pack. However, some of the headlands, at low tide can be skipped by walking around them. Cut to my friend and I hiking along the beach to the final headland. We decide we should walk around this one instead of up and over. Mind you, we were without map, and did not remember this headland, being the last one for us to cross, was not only impassable, but also almost a mile long. As we are walking along the rocks and sand around the outside, we became weary of the waist-high tide pools we were wading through, as we realized the tide was coming in quickly. We rounded the tip of the headland, eager to begin our return to land, until we noticed the submerged, impassable cave in our way, with a 10-foot maelstrom raging in the middle of it, and the jagged rocks beyond it. Behind us were the waves, now crashing into the cliff walls we were passing along for the last hour or so. The incoming storm did not make the experience any more enjoyable. As we evaluated our options, we realized we had some battery left on our one cell phone, and 1 bar of signal. As it turns out, the Coast Guard and the National Guard don't operate in that area on the coast. So with our remaining battery, I call my dad and explain our current plan: inflate our sleeping pads, empty our water bottles, and seal our bear buckets for the swim to shore. Much to his objection, we prepare ourselves for the journey as the tide rose closer and closer to our feet on our small outcropping. Then we plunged, packs first, into the rough waters. The swim was about a mile in length, including the swim out to avoid the current of the maelstrom. The undertow didn't make it go any faster. About an hour and a half of constant paddling, we finally made landfall, backpacks waterlogged, weighing about an extra 60 pounds each. Just as we finished kissing the beach, we noticed the small skiff rounding the far headland, 2 men pointing at us and waving. The forest ranger in the area rounded the point and told us to look up, right as the helicopter flew overhead. As it turns out, my father, not happy with my story, made them fly a really long sortie to find us. I still feel bad about it. Fast forward to getting in the car, after the 2-hour trek from there back to the starting point, and there is a brigade of emergency vehicles and park rangers awaiting the arrival of 2 idiots who tempted nature. They loved the story at least. Packed up, drove off, and got us some fat smitties. Best burger and shake I've ever had. My mum and dad took myself and my 2 younger sisters for a road trip in northern Western Australia. I was about 10, which would make my sisters 8 and 6. One day we are heading towards Mount Augustus and stop on the way at this massive gorge. My sister had pointed out how close the sky was the top of one of the smaller nearby mountains, and she wanted to go touch the clouds. Well, we set up our camp and my sisters and I decide we will go for a walk around and see what we can find. We start following this massive gorge for what I think is perhaps half an hour. My sisters start to complain and I decide it's time to go back to mom and dad. We walk for ages. By this time the sun is down and it is getting dark. I start to get a little panicked because I was sure it did not take us this long to get in. My sisters are crying but we continue on. We soon hear someone shouting our names. It's Dad. He has come to save us. Mom and Dad were pissed to say the least. Apparently we had been gone for over 3 hours and they thought we had tried to climb the mountain to touch the clouds. Dad had climbed the mountain to find us and freaked out when he couldn't find us. It was such a relief to be back at the camp. Well, I went on a date with this girl who took me to a strip club, and I hate strip clubs, so I figure, fuck it, I'll drink my face off and try to enjoy it. So as a lightweight I'm trying to keep up with her borderline alcoholic tendencies and I of course, black out. As far as I was told after the fact, we got into a cab and she got out halfway. After that point all I remember is getting thrown face first into the snow and the cab driving away. I assume I only had my debit with me and he didn't take that, so he stole my phone, $5 and my $50 Tim Hortons card. Where I was, I couldn't tell you, but I was in the middle of a forest during a 18C, 0.4F, blizzard while I was wearing my fanciest and thinnest outfit. Sadly, my parents had just assumed I was getting laid so they never called the police. I drunkenly stumbled in a random direction, screaming at the top of my lungs for help, barely keeping conscious as I went because I was so drunk. I ended up falling over and ripping open my pants. Regardless of it all I just kept walking. I refused to die there. After 6 hours of walking I somehow managed to follow the light of my town against the clouds, back almost directly to my subdivision luckily. I walked in my front door at 8 a.m. and fell to the floor freezing. I couldn't form sentences or even words. I was so cold and instantly blacked out when I hit the ground. My parents called 911 and an ambulance came while my parents stripped me naked and threw me in the bathtub. From there my memories are very partial while talking to the paramedics, but I was pretty candid because I was just happy to be fucking warm again. I did get very minor frostbite on my fingertips and the inside of my left thigh. I was unable to play guitar or game, both pretty much my life, for about 3 months and couldn't feel them at all for 6, but I didn't lose any appendages, so lucky for that. Police were called but because I was drunk when it happened they said there was no evidence to investigate it with. When I was about 11 I was fixated on exploring. We lived in a small town in rural Ohio surrounded by woods that I was sure no one had went into until I moved there. One day after school I planned to pack a mini survival bag and just explore the area. I had 2 twin cousins that wanted to come with me. We will call them Thing 1 and Thing 2. They were sisters and fought a lot more than anybody I've ever seen in my life, and I hesitated at first but in the end agreed to their company regardless of the annoyances, because if things got bad I didn't want to be alone. Long story short, we got lost and the sun started to set, and I had nothing useful in my survival bag to actually help. But I was 11, so give me a break. We came to a part in the woods where it was swampy. You thought you were looking at a puddle, but really it was about a 5-foot hole of water. My cousins were bickering the whole way, and at one point in time one walked under a tree branch and let go of the branch, and the branch hits my other cousin directly in the eye. She starts screaming, and I went over to see if she was okay, and she pulled her eyelid down and I see a 1/4-inch thick piece of wood sticking out of her eye. At that moment I'm not very proud about. I was so shook up from what I seen, being lost, listening to the constant bickering back and forth, and the whole ordeal in general. I ran and fell into one of those big 5-foot puddles of water. I was able to crawl out with their help, but now at that point in 30-degree weather I'm wet, cold, scared, and lost in swampy woods with these two morons and other wild animals like boars and demons in my head at least. Best part is it's getting dark. Really dark. The dark you can't see but 4 feet in front of you dark. Luckily we found a barbed wire fence and instinct struck me we were near a farm. We eventually ended up on a doorstep. The only house for miles. An old woman let us in and let us use her phone to call my mom, and she was insanely pissed and worried because we've been gone at that point about 5 hours. Obviously we had no sense of time without a watch, but nonetheless because I could see the stars I knew it was really late. When my mom came to pick us up we were about 4 hours away from where we started. She yelled at me all the way home, however I was so happy to be in that car I don't remember a thing she said that night. I've never done something like that since then. The night ended with us all 3 having a touch of hypothermia, cuts, bruises, and my cousin had to have surgery to repair her eye.